Welcome back, everyone. Have you ever listened to 2 consecutive albums by a prog band and think, this could have been a 4-sided album? In this episode of my prog rock show, we are going to explore 10 pairs of prog albums in which an unknowing listener might not know when one album ends and another begins. I'm going to split this episode into 2 parts. As you know, I like to keep my videos relatively short. This video is just for fun and is definitely not perfect. The rule is the albums must be 2 consecutive studio albums, so there can be a live album in between. Let's begin. Let's start with a heavy hitter. Peter Gabriel had left Genesis after The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, and lo and behold, they had another lead singer in the band the whole time, drummer Phil Collins. So did Genesis continue to build off of Lamb? I would say no, more like selling England by the pound. Their next studio album, 1976's Trick of the Tail, proved Genesis was running on all prog cylinders and Phil Collins was a natural frontman. Within the same year, Genesis released Wind and Wuthering, which continued in the same vein. As Hackett put it, they were happily sparking off each other. Due to the proximity in time, and the similar sound of both albums, they could probably exist in the same album sleeve. Cracks were beginning to show with guitarist Steve Hackett, who already had a taste of solo success with 1975's Voyage of the Acolyte. A combination of missing Gabriel, getting too much of his material rejected, and any farther solo work being looked down upon caused Hackett to depart Genesis, which would have the greatest impact on their sound as more pop elements would surface. If I were to play What If for a moment and Steve Hackett stayed, I believe he would have left after one more album anyway. There is no way he would have stuck around. Fun fact, if he did stick around, the album would not have been called And Then There Were Three. Believe it or not, it would have been called something else. Yeah. Anyways, what were the 2 albums I was originally talking about again? My apologies for interrupting my own video, but speaking of Genesis, music author Bruce Pegg is at it again. Coming off the heels of Welcome Back, My Friends, A People's History of Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Bruce is ready to compile another book in the same format titled, you guessed it, I Know What I Like, A People's History of Genesis. If you have seen Genesis live or have had any encounters with members of the band, then this is your opportunity to get your story published. So Genesis fans, unite. If you are interested in submitting a personal experience with Genesis, I will leave a link in the description below. Now back to our regularly scheduled programming. Let's face it, Too Old to Rock and Roll, Too Young to Die was a bit lackluster, proving that Jethro Tull struggled with concept albums, with 2 out of 3 being panned by critics, the other being a passion play. Jethro Tull's next venture would be inspired by the book Folklore Myths and Legends of Britain. Folk rock would take over Tull's sound in Songs from the Wood, also inspired by Steely Dan. What? Supposed to be Steel Eye Span? Songs from the Wood would also be inspired by Steel Eye Span. They sound so close. This style of English folk centered around interwoven acoustic guitars, mandolin, and pipe organ, a musical avenue that suited Tull well. Songs from the Wood was recorded towards the end of 1976 and released in February of 1977. Although the critical response was lukewarm, the album sold well even with punk looming and is still revered as a classic Tull album. This sound would spill over on their next album. At the beginning of 1978, Jethro Tull returned to the studio with the same musicians in tow for what seemed to be an ever-changing lineup to record Heavy Horses. Riding high off the success of the previous album, and with the countryside as inspiration, it was a logical decision to stick with a similar musical style. Although Ann Anderson didn't feel it was as fun as its predecessor, again, the critics weren't keen on the album, but the buying public ate it up. Both albums were well represented on the live follow-up Bursting Out. Even though the next studio album, Stormwatch, is considered to be the third of a trilogy, it didn't quite have the same impact. Songs from the Wood and Heavy Horses really were the last juggernauts from Jethro Tull, until Under Wraps came out, of course. I'm sure everyone agrees. Frank Zappa's Overnight Sensation and Apostrophe are usually mentioned in the same breath. Although not perfect facsimiles, there are plenty of similarities. They are the most accessible in Zappa's catalog, giving a new to Frank Zappa listener a good place to start. Both albums feature mostly the same cast of characters, which says a lot because Frank always had a revolving door of musicians. Not surprising since the albums were released a little more than 6 months apart, with Overnight Sensation hitting the shelves in September of 1973 and Apostrophe the following March. Cream's Jack Bruce would make an appearance with his fuzz bass on the title track for Apostrophe, helping make the album Zappa's most successful. Zappa handles most of the vocals on Overnight Sensation and all of the vocals on Apostrophe. This is unique since Frank prefers to share vocal duties with other singers. Zappa's humor is threaded throughout both albums on songs like Dynamo Hum, avoid listening to that song around children, and Don't Eat Yellow Snow, which he credits making enough money to work on various orchestral projects which ultimately lost him money. Lastly, neither album hits the 35-minute mark, making them play together like one long album. Even the Album Classics DVD documentary features the making of both albums together. These tweezers are not encrusted with zircon. Coliseum keyboardist Dave Greenslade formed Greenslade in the autumn of 1972 with fellow Coliseum member, bass player Tony Clark, Samurai and Webb keyboardist Dave Lawson, and King Crimson and Fields drummer Andy McAuliffe as a sort of lesser-known supergroup, or just a group. Their self-titled debut and second album, Bedside Manners Are Extra, were both released in 1973, featuring complementing keyboards from both Daves. Both coming from jazz outfits, it's surprising they forged a more unique sound with complex arrangements without being overly flashy. Although Dave Greenslade assembled the band with his namesake, he did not consider himself a frontman, making it a band effort. If you listen to the beginning of the first song on the second album, Bedside Manners Are Extra, it sounds like it picks up right at the end of the last song, Sundance, from the first album. I'm not sure if this was intentional, but it sure sounds like it. Both albums are adorned by Roger Dean artwork featuring a distinct multi-armed figure, farther unifying both recordings and adding to the consistency between both. Greenslade would churn out 2 more albums before breaking up due to a bad management deal. Fortunately, some live recordings would surface in recent years, keeping their legacy alive. El Dorado is arguably Electric Light Orchestra's greatest achievement, but it is what they did immediately after that really defined the band. Instead of trying to outdo El Dorado, Jeff Lynne dialed it back, releasing 2 accessible albums, Face the Music in 1975 and A New World Record in 1976, making them good examples for the topic of this video. ELO would also see a lot of chart success on both sides of the Atlantic, with each album and their singles making this one of their most prolific periods. Songs like Evil Woman, Strange Magic, Livin' Thing, all are recognizable with their pop-prog approach with plenty of strings. Even Do Ya was dusted off from Lynne's previous band The Move after Todd Rundgren had been performing it live during this period. ELO would actually follow this up with the 4-sided album Out of the Blue, continuing their successful run, ending with their masterpiece Discovery, said No One Ever. ELO would move away from real strings, opting for the use of synthesizers as recording strings was becoming tedious. ELO would reach their peak after Jeff Lynne departed in the 80s with ELO Part 2. Again, said No One Ever. Would you like to make any predictions for Part 2 of this video? Let me know in the comments section below. Thank you for watching, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you in part 2 of this video. It's not my fault I thought Steely Dan and Steel Eye Span were similar. I thought they were the same band the whole time.